In the dry heat of the afternoon, a wealthy man parks his convertible in front of a mansion perched on a hill, surrounded by immaculate gardens. In his arms, he holds a sick infant, the child of an employee, eyes half open from exhaustion. As he heads toward the rooftop, the baby struggles to breathe, while the man smiles at his friends nearby. Below in the stable, a white horse shakes its head, nervous from the noise above. Silently, the man ties a rope to the roof and hangs the baby like a living decoration. The horse breaks through the fence and charges toward the mansion, leaving behind love stories with animals. Then subscribe now so you don't miss a single one. Thanks for joining us. Now, back to the story. The mansion on Willow Hill stood like a monument to excess, its white columns and sprawling gardens visible for miles across the Hudson Valley. Inside its marble halls, Richard Harrington moved with the practiced ease of a man who had never known want. Crystal glasses clinked as servers weaved through the crowd of New York's elite, their laughter rising to the vaulted ceilings where chandeliers cast fractured light across faces flushed with champagne and privilege. Another spectacular evening. "Richard," cooed Vivian Pierce, her diamond earrings catching the light as she leaned in. "No one throws parties like yours in the entire state." Richard offered a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. At 45, he had mastered the art of appearing engaged while his mind wandered elsewhere. These gatherings had become a ritual devoid of meaning, the same conversations, the same flattery, the same people drawn to his fortune like moths to flame. "You're too kind," he replied automatically, scanning the room for something, anything, that might break the monotony of his existence. Richard had everything money could buy, yet found himself increasingly hollow, desperate for a reaction that wasn't calculated or rehearsed. Outside, beyond the manicured lawns and security gates, 8-year-old Tommy Wilson sat with his back against the stable wall, his small fingers working through the tangles in a chestnut mare's mane. The horse, Willow, named after the hill where the mansion stood, lowered her head to the boy's level, her breath warm against his face. "Dad says Mr. Harrington might sell you," Tommy whispered, his voice catching. "Says he gets bored of things. Real quick." Tommy's father had worked as the stable manager for 3 years, the longest he'd held a job since Tommy's mother had disappeared from their lives. The boy had grown up in the small cottage at the edge of the Harrington property, largely unseen by the mansion's owner and his guests. In that invisibility, Tommy had found freedom to roam the grounds and form an unbreakable bond with Willow. The mare nudged Tommy's shoulder gently as though understanding his words. Her intelligent eyes, deep and knowing, reflected the setting. Sun as shadows lengthened across the property. "I won't let him, though," Tommy continued, reaching into his pocket for a slightly bruised apple. "I'll save up and buy you myself." Inside the mansion, Richard excused himself from a tedious conversation about hedge funds and retreated to his study. The wood-paneled room, lined with books he'd never read and artifacts purchased solely for their price tags, had become his refuge when the emptiness became too suffocating. He poured himself a generous scotch and moved to the window. From this vantage point, he could see the stables, and for the first time, he noticed the small figure sitting beside his prized mare. The stable manager's son. He'd glimpsed the boy occasionally, but had never paid him much attention. Children, like most things in Richard's life, were abstract concepts rather than realities. "Sir?" His assistant, Marcus, appeared at the door. "The guests are asking for you. Ms. Devereaux has suggested charades." Richard swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Charades," he repeated flatly. "How thrilling." "You did mention wanting something more engaging for your next gathering." Richard's lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "I did, didn't I? Something unexpected. Something that would actually make these people feel something authentic for once." An idea began to form in his mind, vague and troubling, but electric with possibility. His gaze returned to the window, to the boy and the horse below. "Tell them I'll be right there," he said. "And Marcus, find out more about the stable manager's son, the quiet one who's always hanging around the horses." "Tommy, sir. Tommy Wilson." "Yes, him. I might have an idea for our next event that would certainly be memorable." Marcus nodded, though uncertainty flickered across his features. "Of course, sir." As Richard returned to his guests, his mind raced with possibilities. For years, he had been the perfect host, providing every comfort and entertainment money could buy. But what if he created something truly provocative, something that would force his guests to confront the artifice of their social performances? The next morning, Tommy arrived at the stables earlier than usual. His father had left before dawn to pick up feed from a supplier in Albany, leaving the boy with strict instructions to finish his schoolwork before heading to the stables. Tommy had rushed through his math problems, making careless errors in his haste. The morning mist still clung to the grass as he made his way across the property. The mansion stood silent, its windows reflecting the pale dawn light like unseeing eyes. Tommy preferred the estate this way, empty of the loud, laughing strangers who arrived in expensive cars and looked through him as though he were invisible. Willow nickered softly when she heard his approach. The sound echoed in the quiet stable, a greeting that made the boy smile despite the heaviness in his chest. His father had been drinking again last night, speaking in angry bursts about money and respect and the heartless rich folks who viewed them as disposable. "Morning, Willow," Tommy whispered, reaching for the brush he kept on a shelf just outside. Her stall, the repetitive motion of grooming the horse soothed him, creating a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. "Dad's in one of his moods again." The horse remained perfectly still as he worked, occasionally turning her head to watch him with those eyes that seemed to understand everything. Tommy often told Willow things he couldn't tell anyone else, about how he sometimes couldn't remember his mother's face, or how the kids at school laughed at his second-hand clothes. "You're the only one who listens," he said, pressing his forehead against the mare's warm neck. "I find horses are often better listeners than people." Tommy startled at the voice, nearly dropping the brush. Richard Harrington stood at the stable entrance, dressed in riding clothes that looked too pristine to have ever seen actual use. Tommy had never been this close to the mansion's owner before, and the man's presence filled the stable like a storm cloud. I'm sorry, sir," Tommy stammered, taking a step back. "My dad said I could—" Richard waved a dismissive hand. "No, need to apologize. The horse seems to like you." Tommy nodded cautiously, unsure of how to respond. Willow had tensed at the stranger's arrival, her ears flicking back and forth in alertness. "Willow, sir. Her name is Willow." Richard approached slowly, his expensive leather boots creaking on the stable floor. "Willow," he repeated, reaching out to touch the mare's flank. The horse sidestepped, moving closer to Tommy. "Skittish, isn't she?" "She's not used to many people," Tommy explained, instinctively placing a protective hand on Willow's neck. "Just me and my dad, mostly." Richard studied the boy with newfound interest. There was something in the child's posture, a quiet dignity. Despite his worn clothes and dirt-smudged face, that intrigued him. Here was someone genuine in a world Richard found increasingly artificial. "How would you like to help me with something, Tommy?" Richard asked, his tone suddenly warm with forced camaraderie. "Something special for my next gathering." Tommy hesitated. His father had warned him to stay away from the big house and its owner. "What kind of something, sir?" Richard smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Something memorable. Something involving you and Willow here. I'd make it worth your while, of course." Maybe even ensure your father's position here is more secure. The implied threat wasn't lost on Tommy, young as he was. He swallowed hard, looking to Willow as if the horse might offer guidance. The mare's ears remained pinned back, her body tense beside him. "I should ask my dad first," Tommy said finally, his voice small but steady. Richard's smile tightened. "Of course. But think about it, won't you? It would be quite an opportunity." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Tommy? Our conversation is just between us for now. No need to worry your father unnecessarily." As Richard's footsteps faded, Tommy wrapped his arms around Willow's neck, breathing in her familiar scent of hay and open fields. For the first time, the stable that had always been his sanctuary felt less safe, infiltrated by something he couldn't quite name but instinctively feared. Above them, clouds gathered on the horizon, casting long shadows across Willow Hill as, though nature itself was responding to the shift in the air, something building, something brewing, something that would soon break like a storm across the lives of everyone beneath its reach. The days following Richard's visit to the stable passed in a haze of unease for Tommy. Each morning, he would glance toward the mansion, half expecting to see the tall figure of its owner, striding across the lawn, coming to collect on their unspoken agreement. But Richard Harrington remained absent, sequestered within his world of business calls and social engagements. "You're jumpy as a grasshopper today," Tommy's father remarked, one evening as they ate a simple dinner of macaroni and cheese at their small kitchen table. "Something happened at school?" Tommy pushed his food around his plate. "No, sir." Jim Wilson studied his son with tired eyes. At 36, he looked a decade older, his face weathered by hard work and harder disappointments. After his wife had left, seeking something better, she'd said in the note she left behind, Jim had struggled to keep their lives from falling apart completely. The job at Harrington Estate had been a lifeline, even if it came with the daily reminder of the vast distance between those who had and those who served. "You know you can tell me if something's bothering you, right?" Jim's voice softened. It was the voice he used when he was trying to be both father and mother to a boy who deserved better than what life had dealt him. Tommy nodded, guilt churning in his stomach. He wanted to tell his father about Richard's strange request, about the uneasy feeling that had settled like a stone in his chest. But the implied threat about his father's job held him back. "Just tired, I guess," Tommy said finally. Later that night, unable to sleep, Tommy slipped out of bed and padded to the window. From here, he could just make out the silhouette of the stables against the moonlit sky. Somewhere in that shadowy building, Willow waited, a comforting presence even at a distance. The mansion beyond blazed with light, unusual for a Tuesday evening. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the security lamps like scattered stars. Another party, another gathering of people who would look through Tommy as if he were made of glass. Without fully deciding, Tommy pulled on his sneakers and jacket. His father had fallen asleep on the couch, an empty beer bottle on the floor beside him. The boy slipped out the back door, drawn to the stables by an instinct he couldn't name. The night air carried, the first hint of autumn, crisp and promising. Tommy stuck to the shadows, avoiding the well-lit paths that wound through the property. He'd become adept at moving unseen, a skill born of necessity in a place where his presence was barely tolerated. The stable was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of hooves and soft exhalations of the horses. Tommy made his way to Willow's stall, reaching for the latch with practiced ease. "Hey, girl," he whispered. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" Willow's ears perked forward at the sound of his voice. She moved toward him, her large body radiating warmth in the cool night air. Tommy settled on a pile of clean straw, leaning against the wall of the stall. Willow lowered herself beside him, folding her legs with surprising grace for such a large animal. It was something she'd done since Tommy first started visiting, a sign of trust that the stable hand said was unusual for a horse. "Mr. Harrington was asking about you," Tommy confided, his voice barely audible above the gentle rustling of straw. "He wants us for something at his party, something memorable," he said. Willow's dark eye gleamed in the dimness, watching him intently. "Dad would be real mad if he knew I was talking to Mr. Harrington without telling him." Tommy pulled his knees to his chest. "But if I don't, Mr. Harrington might fire Dad, and then what would we do? Where would we go?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. They'd moved 3 times in the 2 years after his mother left, each home smaller and shabbier than the last. The cottage on the Harrington estate, despite its limitations, was the closest thing to stability Tommy had known since. "And what would happen to you?" he added, stroking Willow's neck. The thought of being separated from the horse made his throat tighten painfully. A sudden burst of laughter from the direction of the mansion startled them both. Willow's ears flicked toward the sound, and she lifted her head alertly. Curiosity pulled Tommy to his feet. "I'll be right back," he promised, slipping out of the stall. Moving silently, Tommy made his way closer to the mansion than he'd ever dared before. The party was in full swing, music and conversation spilling out onto the terrace, where guests in elegant attire mingled beneath strings of twinkling lights. From his hiding place behind a sculpted hedge, Tommy could see Richard Harrington holding court at the center of a group of rapt listeners. The man's face was animated in a way Tommy hadn't witnessed during their encounter in the stable, alive with something that looked almost like hunger. "Next weekend's gathering will be unlike anything you've experienced," Richard was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I promise you something truly extraordinary, a spectacle that will be remembered long after the champagne has gone flat." One of the women laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Richard, but now you've got us all intrigued." Richard's smile tightened. "Let's just say it will challenge our collective comfort with risk and reward. A reminder of the thin line between entertainment and something else entirely." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept up Tommy's spine. Though he didn't fully understand the conversation, he recognized the tone. It was the same edge he'd heard in Richard's voice in the stable, a current of something dangerous beneath the polished surface. "Tommy Wilson, what in God's name are you doing out here?" The boy nearly jumped out of his skin at the sound of Marcus's voice behind him. The assistant's normally composed features were twisted with alarm and irritation. I was just..." Tommy stammered, backing away. Marcus grabbed his arm, not roughly but firmly enough to prevent escape. "Your father would lose his mind if he knew you were sneaking around the main house at this hour. And Mr. Harrington..." "Mr. Harrington what?" Richard's voice cut through the night as he approached from the terrace, several curious guests trailing behind him. Marcus straightened, his grip on Tommy's arm loosening slightly. "Sir, I was just escorting young Mr. Wilson back to the cottage. He seems to have wandered a bit far from home." Richard's gaze fell on Tommy, recognition and something like amusement flickering across his features. "Well, well, our young horse whisperer has become an explorer as well." Tommy felt the weight of the guests' stares, their curious eyes moving over his worn pajama pants, visible beneath his jacket, his unruly hair, his scuffed sneakers. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the manicured lawn beneath his feet. "I'm sorry, sir," he managed. "I was checking on Willow and then I heard voices and..." "Willow?" one of the women interrupted, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. "The horse? How quaint." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "No harm done. In fact, Tommy's arrival is rather fortuitous. I was just telling my friends about next weekend's special entertainment. Tommy's heart sank. Whatever Richard had planned, the look in the man's eyes confirmed his worst fears. He and Willow were to be at the center of it. Marcus, why don't you ensure Tommy gets home safely? Richard continued smoothly. And perhaps stop by my study. Tomorrow morning, we should finalize the arrangements for our young friend's participation. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, though Tommy noticed a flicker of discomfort cross the assistant's face. As Marcus led him away, Tommy could feel Richard's gaze following them, heavy as a physical touch. The boy resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other, moving away from the light and laughter of the mansion toward the safety of shadows. You should be more careful, Marcus said quietly once they were out of earshot. Mr. Harrington has been different lately, restless. Tommy looked up at the man walking beside him. Marcus had always been polite but distant during his 3 years at the estate, a background figure who occasionally nodded in passing but never engaged. Different how? Tommy asked, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. Marcus hesitated, glancing back toward the mansion. Let's just say he's been looking for new forms of entertainment, more provocative ones. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party fading behind them. When they reached the fork in the path that led to the cottage, Marcus stopped. Does your father know about Mr. Harrington's interest in you and the horse? Tommy shook his head. He said not to tell him. Said it might affect Dad's job. Marcus's lips pressed into a tight line. I see. After a moment's consideration, he added, perhaps you should stay close to home this week, focus on your schoolwork. But Willow, the mare will be fine. The stable hands will see to her care. Tommy wanted to protest, to explain that Willow needed him, that she got anxious when he didn't visit, but the gravity in Marcus's expression stopped him. Good night, Tommy, Marcus said, already turning back toward the mansion. Remember what I said. Tommy watched him go, a solitary figure moving through pools of security, light toward the glittering house on the hill. Then, with reluctance weighing down each step, he headed home. Inside the cottage, his father still slept on the couch, oblivious to his son's absence. Tommy stood watching him for a moment, the rise and fall of his chest, the slight frown that remained even in sleep, the work-roughened hands that had held Tommy through countless nightmares after his mother left. I'll fix this, Tommy whispered, though he had no idea how. I promise. That night, Tommy dreamed of Willow running free across endless fields, her mane streaming like a banner in the wind. He tried to follow, but his feet were rooted to the ground, unable to move as she disappeared into the horizon. He woke with tears on his cheeks and a certainty that something had to be done before Richard Harrington's next party, before whatever spectacle the man had planned could come to pass. In the mansion on the hill, Richard sat alone in his study, long after the last guest had departed, nursing a final glass of scotch as he contemplated the perfect climax to his upcoming entertainment. Something memorable indeed, something that would finally break through the numbing sameness of his existence and force a genuine reaction from his jaded companions. The thought brought a smile to his lips as he raised his glass toward the window, toward the stables where his unlikely stars waited in unknowing anticipation of their roles in the drama to come. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. Despite Marcus's warning, Tommy couldn't stay away from the stables. He'd slip in during his lunch break from school or in the early morning before his father woke, desperate for those moments with Willow that still felt safe in a world that increasingly didn't. On Thursday afternoon, Tommy arrived to find an unfamiliar truck parked outside the stable entrance. Men in crisp uniforms were unloading equipment, metal poles, thick coils of rope, spotlights that seemed better suited for a theater than a horse stable. "What's all this for?" Tommy asked one of the regular stable hands, a college student named Derek, who occasionally let Tommy help with the feeding. Derek shrugged, though his expression was uneasy. "Some kind of demonstration for Mr. Harrington's party on Saturday. Marcus said they're setting up in the North Paddock and we're supposed to stay clear." Tommy's stomach twisted into a cold knot. The North Paddock was Willow's favorite place, a wide, grassy area where she would sometimes break into a playful gallop when Tommy managed to convince his father to let him exercise her. "Did they say anything about which horses they're using?" Tommy tried to keep his voice casual, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Just that chestnut mare you're always hanging around," Derek replied, not unkindly. "Your dad know you're here. Instead of at school?" "Teacher work day," Tommy lied, already backing away. "I gotta go." He sprinted toward Willow's stall, finding the mare agitated, pacing the small space with her ears pinned back. The noise and unfamiliar voices had clearly disturbed her. When she saw Tommy, she immediately came to the front of the stall, pressing her nose against his shoulder with unusual force. "It's okay, girl," Tommy whispered, though they both knew it wasn't. "I won't let anything happen to you." But what could he do? He was just a kid, a nobody on the vast Harrington estate, as invisible and inconsequential as a shadow. "Tommy." His father's voice, hard with barely controlled anger, cut through his thoughts. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school." Tommy turned slowly, caught in the lie. "Dad, Save it." Jim Wilson's face was flushed, his jaw tight. "I just got a call from your principal. You haven't been to school in 2 days. 2 days, Tommy." Guilt and fear warred in Tommy's chest. "I'm sorry, but Dad, there's something." No excuses. Jim ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of frustrated helplessness that made him look suddenly older. "You know how precarious things are for us. If I lose this job?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you," Tommy blurted out. "Mr. Harrington, he's planning something for his party, something with Willow and me, and I don't think it's good. He won't say what it is, but everyone's acting weird, and now they're bringing in all this equipment." Jim's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What are you talking about? When did you speak to Mr. Harrington?" Tommy's words tumbled out in a rush. The encounter in the stable, the veiled threat about his father's job, the overheard conversation at the party, Marcus's warning. With each revelation, his father's face grew darker. "And you kept this from me?" Jim's voice was dangerously quiet. "All week you've been carrying this around, skipping school, lying to me." "I was scared," Tommy admitted, his voice small. "He said not to tell you." For a long moment, Jim was silent, his internal struggle visible in the tightening of his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Finally, he knelt, to Tommy's level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me, Tommy. No job is worth putting you in a situation that doesn't feel right. No job. Do you understand?" Relief flooded through Tommy so intensely that tears sprang to his eyes. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "I'm going to talk to Mr. Harrington right now," Jim continued, straightening. "You stay here with Willow. Don't move until I come back." "But Dad, no arguments. This is adult business now." As his father strode away, determination in every line of his body, Tommy felt a mix of hope and dread. He turned back to Willow, who watched him with those knowing eyes. "He'll fix it," Tommy told her, trying to convince himself as much as the horse. "Dad will make it right." But when Jim Wilson returned 40 minutes later, the defeated slump of his shoulders told Tommy everything he needed to know before his father spoke a single word. "Pack your things," Jim said, his voice hollow. "We're Leaving tomorrow morning. Leaving? But what about Willow? Jim wouldn't meet his son's eyes. She stays. She belongs to Mr. Harrington. What did he say to you? Tommy demanded, panic rising in his chest. What's he planning to do? Nothing that we'll be part of, Jim replied firmly. We're done here, Tommy. There are other jobs, other places, but not other Willows. Tommy's voice broke on the name. Dad, please, we can't just leave her. Jim crouched down again, grasping Tommy's shoulders with a gentleness that belied the steel in his voice. Some battles we can't win, son. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be. That night, Tommy lay awake in his bed, listening to his father making phone calls in the kitchen, quiet, urgent conversations about temporary housing and job prospects in neighboring counties. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of the life Tommy had built at Willow Hill, another step away from the horse who had become his closest friend. The decision crystallized slowly, forming like ice in the pit of his stomach. If his father wouldn't fight for Willow, then Tommy would have to do it himself. He waited until the house fell silent, until his father's breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep that Tommy had memorized over countless nights. Then, moving with the stealth born of necessity, he slipped from his bed and pulled on his clothes. The backpack he'd prepared earlier contained everything he thought he'd need: a flashlight, a rope halter he'd made himself from instructions. On YouTube, a few apples, and his savings of $37. Not enough to start a new life, but maybe enough to buy time until he figured out a better plan. The night was moonless, clouds obscuring the stars and plunging the estate into near total darkness. Tommy navigated by memory and instinct, his feet finding the familiar path to the stables despite the absence of light. The main stable door was locked, something that had never happened before. Tommy circled the building, searching for another entrance, his desperation growing with each passing minute. Finally, he discovered a small window at the back, just large enough for his slender frame to squeeze through if he could reach it. After dragging an empty feed barrel beneath the window, Tommy clambered up and pushed against the glass. To his surprise, it swung inward easily. He pulled himself through, dropping awkwardly onto a stack of hay bales inside. The stable was eerily quiet, the horses disturbed by the late-night intrusion. Soft nickering and the shuffling of hooves accompanied Tommy's cautious movements as he made his way to Willow's stall. The mare greeted him with a gentle nudge, seemingly unsurprised by his midnight appearance. Tommy wrapped his arms around her neck, breathing in her familiar scent. "We're leaving," he whispered against her warm hide. "Just you and me. I'll figure something out, I promise." With shaking hands, he slipped the halter over Willow's head. The horse accepted it without protest, as if understanding the urgency of their escape. Tommy led her quietly through the stable, pausing at every creak and rustle, his heart thundering so loudly he was certain it would give them away. At the stable entrance, Tommy hesitated. He had no real plan beyond getting Willow away from whatever spectacle Richard had envisioned. Where could they go that they wouldn't be found? How would they survive? The distant sound of voices jerked him from his thoughts. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness near the north paddock, where the equipment had been assembled throughout the day. Tommy froze, pulling Willow deeper into the shadows of the stable entrance. Two figures moved through the darkness, Richard Harrington and Marcus, their voices carrying clearly in the still night air. "Everything is prepared for tomorrow," Marcus was saying, his tone carefully neutral, "though I still have reservations about the nature of the demonstration." Richard laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "Reservations? Come now, Marcus, it's merely a spectacle, a moment of controlled danger that will give my guest something authentic to feel for once. The boy will be perfectly safe, assuming he follows instructions." Richard's voice hardened. His father made his choice. Now we proceed. As planned, with or without the Wilson family's blessing, Tommy's blood turned to ice. They were still planning to go ahead with whatever performance they had designed, even without him. But who would they use instead? Another child from the estate? Someone who might not understand Willow's moods and signals the way Tommy did? The thought of Willow being handled by strangers, forced into some dangerous display for the amusement of Richard's guests, made Tommy's decision for him. They couldn't run, not yet. First, they needed to stop whatever was planned for tomorrow night. As Richard and Marcus moved away, their voices fading into the darkness, Tommy led Willow back to her stall. The escape plan would have to wait. Instead, he needed to understand exactly what Richard had prepared in the North Paddock. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised Willow, pressing his forehead against hers. "We'll figure this out together." Tommy slipped out the way he had come in, careful to leave no trace of his presence. Instead of returning to the cottage, however, he made his way toward the North Paddock, staying low and moving from shadow to shadow, as he'd learned to do on the estate. The paddock had been transformed. Metal scaffolding rose 15 feet into the air, creating a narrow, elevated platform. Thick ropes hung from the highest point, and powerful spotlights had been positioned to illuminate the entire structure. At the base, a small area had been fenced off, just large enough for a horse to stand. The purpose of the construction wasn't immediately clear, but the height of the platform and the arrangement of ropes sent a chill through Tommy. Whatever Richard had planned, it involved someone or something being suspended high above the ground. Tommy crept closer, straining to see more details in the darkness. His foot caught on a coil of rope, sending him stumbling forward with a startled cry that seemed to echo across the silent estate. "Who's there?" Marcus's voice rang out sharply. A flashlight beam swept across the paddock, catching Tommy in its glare before he could retreat. "Tommy Wilson." Richard stepped forward, his silhouette backlit by the security lights from the mansion. "I believe I've underestimated your resourcefulness." Tommy scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. "What are you going to do?" he demanded, his voice braver than he felt. "What's all this for?" Richard approached slowly, his smile visible even in the dim light. "Merely a demonstration of trust and courage. A moment of suspense for my guests." "With Willow. And who else now that I'm leaving?" "Leaving?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Is that what your father told you?" Confusion rippled through Tommy. "We're going tomorrow. Dad already packed our things." Richard exchanged a look with Marcus before returning his attention to Tommy. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Your father and I reached an agreement this afternoon. He's accepted a significant bonus to remain on the estate, contingent, of course, on your participation in tomorrow night's event." "You're lying," Tommy whispered, though doubt crept in, like poison. His father had been making calls, yes, but had he really been planning their departure? Or had he been telling relatives about the sudden windfall, the unexpected change in their fortunes? "Ask him yourself," Richard suggested smoothly, "though perhaps wait until morning. He seemed quite exhausted by our negotiations." Tommy backed away, shaking his head in disbelief. "I won't do it. Whatever it is, I won't." "I think you will." Richard's voice was soft, but carried an undeniable threat. "For your father's sake, for Willow's sake. Some battles, Tommy, we simply can't win." The echo of his father's words from earlier that evening hit Tommy like a physical blow. Had his father been preparing him not for their departure, but for submission to Richard's demands? "Marcus will escort you home," Richard continued, gesturing for his assistant to step forward. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be memorable for us all." As Marcus led him away, a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder, Tommy felt something inside him harden into resolve. This wasn't over. Whatever Richard had planned, whatever agreement his father might have made, Tommy would find a way to protect Willow, even if it meant standing alone against the master of Willow Hill. Saturday arrived with the inevitability of a turning tide. Tommy woke to find his father sitting at their small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Jim Wilson looked up as his son entered, the shadows under his eyes testifying to a sleepless night. "You spoke to him," Tommy said, "not a question." Jim nodded slowly. "I did. And you took his money." Something flashed in Jim's eyes, pain, guilt, or perhaps defiance. "I made a choice, Tommy, the only choice available to us. We could have left." Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "We could have just gone away, found another place." "With what?" Jim's hand came down hard on the table, rattling his untouched coffee. "Do you have any idea what it's like out there? Jobs gone, housing costs through the roof. Do you think I haven't been trying to find something better for us these past 3 years?" Tommy stood frozen, unused to seeing his father's composure crack this way. "Mr. Harrington offered us security," Jim continued, his voice softening. "A raise, a new contract, even money for your college someday. All for one night's work." "What kind of work?" Tommy asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't satisfy him. Jim's gaze dropped to the table. "A demonstration with the mayor. He says it's perfectly safe, that you'll be harnessed the entire time." "Harnessed? While doing what?" "It's some kind of dramatic scene," Jim replied vaguely. "You and the horse on the platform they've built, with special lighting and music like a living tableau." Tommy recognized the evasion in his father's words, the careful omission of details he either didn't know or didn't want to face. For the first time, Tommy wondered if his father had deliberately avoided asking Richard for specifics, preferring the comfort of ignorance to the responsibility of knowledge. "I won't do it," Tommy said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his limbs. "I won't be part of whatever crazy thing he's planning." Jim looked up, desperation etched in the lines of his face. "Please, Tommy, just this once. After tonight, things will be different. Better." "Better because we sold ourselves?" The words came out sharper than Tommy intended, but he couldn't take them back. His father flinched as if struck. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things neither knew how to say, about sacrifice and survival, about dignity and compromise, about the impossible choices that shaped their lives. Finally, Jim stood. "Mr. Harrington expects us at the mansion at 4 o'clock for a final rehearsal. Be ready." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm doing the best I can, Tommy. Someday you'll understand that." After his father left, Tommy sat at the table, mind racing. There had to be a way out of this, some solution that wouldn't require submitting to Richard's spectacle or destroying his father's chance at stability. Outside, the estate was transforming for the evening's event. Caterers arrived in vans, security. Personnel patrolled the perimeter, and landscapers made last-minute adjustments to the pristine grounds. The north paddock had been cordoned off with velvet ropes, the metal structure now draped with shimmering fabric that caught the afternoon light. At precisely 4 o'clock, Tommy and his father presented themselves at the mansion's service entrance. Marcus was waiting, his usual professional demeanor strained by something that looked almost like concern. "Mr. Harrington is waiting in the north paddock," he informed them, leading the way across the manicured lawn. Tommy's steps grew heavier as they approached the structure he'd seen the night before. In daylight, its purpose was clearer and more disturbing. The elevated platform stood 15 feet above the ground, with a system of pulleys and ropes attached to a harness that hung ominously in the center. Richard Harrington stood below, directing a team of technicians who were adjusting spotlights. When he saw Tommy, a smile spread across his face. "Our young star arrives," Richard announced, beckoning them closer. "Come, Tommy." Let me show you what we've created." With reluctance weighing down each step, Tommy approached. His father remained, a few paces behind, as if physically unable to witness what he had agreed to. "Tonight's performance is about contrast," Richard explained, guiding Tommy around the structure. "The juxtaposition of innocence and experience, vulnerability and power, risk and safety. You, my boy, will be suspended above the crowd, secured by this professional harness, while Willow circles below." Tommy glanced at the harness with growing dread. "Just suspended, that's it." Richard's smile tightened. "Well, there is a theatrical element, of course. As you hang there, seemingly in peril, the music will build to a crescendo. The lights will create the illusion of danger, shadows suggesting a fall, the crowd holding its breath in anticipation." "But I'll be safe?" Tommy pressed, not trusting the man's smooth explanation. "Perfectly," Richard assured him, though something in his eyes suggested otherwise. "The harness is rated for 3 times your... You wait. The drama comes from the appearance of risk, not actual danger." Tommy looked to his father, who had finally moved closer, his face tight with barely suppressed anxiety. "And Willow?" Tommy asked. "What will she be doing while I'm up there?" "Simply circling below, led by one of our stable hands," Richard replied. "A visual metaphor, the faithful companion unable to reach her young friend." The explanation sounded rehearsed, each word carefully chosen to reveal as little as possible about Richard's true intentions. Tommy's instinct screamed that there was more to this performance than a simple suspended tableau. "Let's do a quick test run, shall we?" Richard suggested, gesturing to the technicians, just so Tommy can get comfortable with the harness. Before Tommy could object, he found himself being fitted with a complex system of straps and buckles. The technicians worked efficiently, checking and double-checking each connection with a professionalism that offered some small comfort. "Now we'll raise you just a few feet," Richard instructed. "Feel the security of the harness, the way it distributes your weight." Tommy shot a panicked look at his father, who stepped forward at last. "I should be the one testing it," Jim insisted. "I'm heavier than Tommy. If it holds me, we'll know it's safe." Richard's expression flickered with annoyance, but he nodded. "As you wish, though it's hardly necessary." The technicians transferred the harness to Jim, who submitted to their adjustments with grim determination. Once secured, he gave a terse nod, and the pulley system engaged, lifting him slowly off the ground. Tommy watched, heart in his throat, as his father rose higher and higher. At about 10 feet, the system paused. "You see?" Richard called up. "Perfectly secure." Jim's face was pale, but he managed a tight smile toward Tommy. "It's okay, son. Solid as a rock." As if summoned by those reassuring words, a loud mechanical groan echoed across the paddock. The pulley system shuddered, and for one heart-stopping moment, Jim Wilson hung suspended in air as a look of pure terror crossed his face. Then, the primary cable snapped. The safety backup caught immediately, preventing a full fall, but the jolt was violent enough to whip Jim's body like a rag doll. He cried out in pain as the harness dug into his flesh, the remaining cables straining under the sudden stress. "Dad!" Tommy screamed, rushing forward only to be held back by Marcus's firm grip. The technicians scrambled to lower the system manually, while Richard stood frozen, his face a mask of shock that Tommy couldn't tell was genuine or performed. When Jim finally reached the ground, he collapsed to his knees, shaking violently. The technicians hurried to free him from the harness, revealing angry red marks where the straps had bitten into his skin. "An unfortunate equipment failure," Richard said smoothly, recovering his composure. "These things happen during technical rehearsals. We'll have it repaired immediately." "Repaired?" Jim's voice was hoarse with disbelief. "My son is not getting in that death trap." Richard's expression hardened. Need I remind you of our agreement, Mr. Wilson? The considerable advance you've already accepted. Tommy watched his father's face crumple with the weight of impossible choices. The money, whatever sum Richard had offered, was likely already spent in Jim's mind on overdue bills and necessities long deferred. "I'll do it," Tommy said suddenly, stepping forward. Both men turned to him in surprise. "I'll still be in your show tonight." "Tommy, no," his father began. "But," Tommy continued, looking directly at Richard, "I want to see Willow first, to make sure she's okay with all this." Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "A reasonable request. Marcus will escort you to the stables while we complete the repairs here." As Tommy followed Marcus across the lawn, away from his protesting father, a plan began to form in his mind, desperate and imperfect, but better than surrender. "You know this is wrong," Tommy said quietly to Marcus as they walked. "Whatever he's really planning, it's not just some artistic performance." Marcus kept his eyes straight ahead. "It's not my place to question Mr. Harrington's artistic vision. Even if someone gets hurt," Tommy pressed, "even if it's a kid." Marcus's stride faltered almost imperceptibly. "The equipment malfunction was unfortunate, but these things happen in technical rehearsals. The system will be thoroughly checked before tonight's performance." They reached the stable in silence. Willow was in her stall, already groomed to a glossy shine for the evening's event. When she saw Tommy, she nickered softly, pressing her nose against his outstretched hand. "Hey, a girl," Tommy whispered, blinking back tears. "We've got a problem to solve." Marcus cleared his throat. "I'll give you a few minutes. Don't wander off." Once alone with Willow, Tommy worked quickly. The small pocket knife he'd borrowed from his father's toolbox that morning made short work of a section of lead rope. With practiced hands, he fashioned a makeshift halter, whispering to Willow as he worked. "We're not doing his show," Tommy murmured. "Not the way he wants it anyway." When Marcus returned 10 minutes later, Tommy was simply stroking Willow's neck, the altered lead, rope hidden in his pocket. "Time to head back," Marcus announced. "The guests will be arriving soon." By the time they returned to the paddock, the technical crew had dispersed, leaving only Richard and Jim in tense conversation. "All is well," Richard declared, seeing Tommy approach. "The system has been thoroughly checked and reinforced. Tonight's performance will proceed without incident." Tommy nodded, his face carefully blank. "When do we start?" Richard checked his watch. "Guests arrive at 7. Your performance is scheduled for 9, the highlight of the evening. Until then, you'll remain in the preparation area with your father." The hours crawled by. Tommy and Jim were sequestered in a small tent near the paddock, provided with sandwiches they couldn't eat and reassurances they didn't believe. Outside, they could hear the estate coming to life as darkness fell, cars arriving, music beginning, the murmur of elegantly dressed guests moving across the lawn. "You don't have to do this," Jim said for perhaps the dozenth time. "We'll figure something out." Tommy met his father's gaze steadily. "I know what I'm doing, Dad." At 8:45, Richard appeared at the tent entrance, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo. "It's time," he announced. "The guests are assembled, and anticipation is building admirably." Tommy stood, squaring his narrow shoulders. "I need to get Willow myself. She trusts me." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "Marcus will accompany you." At the stable, Tommy moved with quiet efficiency, securing his makeshift halter beneath the show halter that had been prepared for Willow. Marcus watched with mild curiosity, but said nothing. "Ready?" Marcus asked when Tommy finished. "Almost." Tommy reached into his pocket, withdrawing the apple he'd saved from lunch. "A little tradition we have," he explained, offering it to Willow. As the horse crunched the apple, Tommy leaned close to her ear, whispering words too soft for Marcus to hear. Willow's ear flicked attentively, her intelligent eyes fixed on the boy as if absorbing every word. The north paddock had been transformed into a theatrical space. Hundreds of guests in formal attire stood around the perimeter, champagne glasses in hand. The scaffolding rose at the center, illuminated by spotlights that created dramatic shadows against the night sky. At the base, a circular area had been defined by more lights, creating what looked like a performance ring. Richard greeted them with a showman's smile. "Excellent timing. I've just finished setting the scene for our audience." Tommy could feel the weight of countless curious gazes as he led Willow toward the center. The mayor moved with uncharacteristic tension, sensing the unusual environment and the energy of the crowd. "Now," Richard said, lowering his voice for only Tommy to hear, "we'll secure you in the harness, raise you to position, and then the real drama begins." "What real drama?" Tommy asked, suspicion flaring anew. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a few theatrical elements we didn't have time to rehearse. Trust me, the audience will be captivated." Before Tommy could respond, the technicians surrounded him, fitting the harness with swift efficiency. His father stood nearby, tension visible in every line of his body. "Last chance," Richard murmured to Jim. "You can still take your son and go. Of course, the financial arrangement would be nullified, and your position here reconsidered." Jim's face contorted with conflicting emotions, fear for his son, shame at his own complicity, and the grinding pressure of economic reality. "Dad," Tommy called, his voice steady despite the trembling in his limbs. "It's okay. I've got this." The pulley system engaged, and Tommy felt himself rising slowly into the air. The harness bit into his shoulders and thighs, but held securely. Below, the guests murmured in appreciation as spotlights followed his ascent. At 15 feet above the ground, the system paused. Tommy hung suspended, looking down at the sea of upturned faces. Strangers in expensive clothes, drinks in hand, waiting to be entertained by what they believed was merely an elaborate performance. Richard stepped into the center of the ring, his voice carrying across the now hushed gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to witness is a tableau of trust and danger. The boy suspended above you represents innocence hanging by the most delicate of threads. The horse below symbolizes raw power that could, at any moment, become destructive." A murmur ran through the crowd as Richard snapped his fingers. Someone handed him what looked like a starter pistol. "When I fire this signal," Richard continued, "our stable hand will release the horse. The animal will circle below, while our young friend dangles precariously above. The question that hangs in the air, like our brave performer, is this: what happens when innocence and power collide? When the thin veneer of civilization is stripped away?" Tommy's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. This wasn't just a static display. Richard intended to frighten Willow with the gunshot, sending her into a panic beneath where Tommy hung helpless. The drama would come from the very real danger, the audience's knowledge that one misstep could bring tragedy. "Now," Richard called, raising the starter pistol, "let us begin." In the split second before he fired, Tommy acted. His fingers found the hidden release in the harness, a safety mechanism he'd identified during the technical rehearsal. As the pistol's crack echoed across the paddock, two things happened simultaneously. Tommy released himself from the harness, dropping in a controlled fall onto Willow's back. And Willow, responding to the hidden halter and the commands Tommy had whispered earlier, reared powerfully, her front hooves pawing the air as Tommy clung to her mane. The crowd gasped collectively, champagne glasses dropping forgotten to the ground. Richard stood frozen, the smoking pistol still raised, as horse and boy moved as one in a display of trust and coordination that defied his orchestrated chaos. Instead of panicking at the gunshot, Willow had responded to Tommy's hidden signals. The mare circled the ring with Tommy balanced on her back, their movements so fluid it was clear this was no accident. but a deliberate counter-performance. "Stop them!" Richard shouted, his carefully constructed spectacle unraveling before his eyes. But no one moved. The audience, believing this was all part of the show, erupted in spontaneous applause. And in their midst, standing now with tears streaming down his face, Jim Wilson watched his son transform fear into triumph. Tommy guided Willow in a final circle before bringing her to a halt directly in front of Richard. The boy's face was flushed with the exhilaration of victory, while the man's had drained of all color. "The show's over," Tommy announced, his young voice carrying in the stunned silence that followed the applause. Richard's face contorted with fury. "You have no idea what you've done, boy. This performance was what, Richard?" A new voice cut through the night. An elegant woman in her 60s stepped forward from the crowd. "Was going to traumatize a child and terrorize an animal for your guests' entertainment? Was going to risk a boy's safety for your twisted concept of authentic emotion." Tommy recognized her from photographs in Richard's study. His aunt, Eleanor Harrington, whose family wealth had established the estate generations ago. "Eleanor," Richard stammered, "you weren't expected until tomorrow." "Clearly," she replied, coldly. "I received some concerning information about tonight's performance from a conscientious employee." Her gaze flickered briefly to Marcus, who stood at the edge of the crowd. "I decided my visit couldn't wait." Eleanor turned to the assembled guests. "I apologize for my nephew's appalling lapse in judgment. The Harrington Foundation has always stood for community support and ethical treatment of both people and animals. This spectacle represents neither." A murmur ran through the crowd as Eleanor approached Tommy, still seated on Willow's back. "Young man," she said, her voice gentler, "that was an extraordinary display of trust between you and this beautiful animal. Far more moving than whatever my nephew had planned." "Thank you, Mom," Tommy replied, suddenly shy under her direct attention. Eleanor's gaze moved to Jim, who had rushed to his son's side. "And you must be the boy's father, the stable manager, I believe." Jim nodded, words failing him. "I think we should discuss your future at the estate," Eleanor continued. "Perhaps a position with more responsibility and appropriate compensation would better reflect your value to Willow Hill." As the implications of her words sank in, Jim's shoulders straightened slightly, hope cautiously returning to his weathered face. "And as for you," Eleanor turned back to Richard, her voice hardening, "we will discuss your future with the family, foundation in private, immediately." As Richard was led away, his carefully constructed world visibly crumbling around him, Tommy slid from Willow's back into his father's waiting arms. "You could have been killed," Jim whispered, holding his son tight. "I trusted Willow," Tommy replied simply, "and I knew you'd catch me if I fell." In the days that followed, Willow Hill transformed. Eleanor Harrington, having seen the bond between Tommy and Willow, officially gifted the mare to the boy. Richard departed for an extended sabbatical at a family property in Europe, his role in managing the estate suspended indefinitely. Jim Wilson found himself promoted to estate manager, with a substantial raise and a move to a larger cottage closer to the main house. More significantly, Eleanor established a therapeutic riding program on the property, with Tommy and Willow as its heart. Children from surrounding communities, many facing challenges similar to Tommy's, began to visit Willow Hill. Under Tommy's guidance, they discovered the healing power of connection with horses, the unspoken bond that had saved him, becoming a lifeline for others. One afternoon, about a month after the infamous party, Tommy sat on the fence of the North Paddock, now transformed into a proper riding ring, watching Willow gentle a trembling 7-year-old through her first ride. Marcus approached, pausing beside him. "You knew all along what Mr. Harrington was planning, didn't you?" Tommy asked without preamble. Marcus nodded slowly. I suspected, but I didn't have the courage to stop it directly. After a pause, he added, That's why I called Ms. Harrington. Tommy, considered this. You could have just told my dad everything. Sometimes adults make choices that seem right at the time, even when they're wrong, Marcus replied. Your father was trying to protect you the only way he knew how. Mr. Harrington convinced him the performance was safe, that the money would secure your future. But you knew better. I should have, Marcus admitted. And when I finally did, I made the call. They watched in silence as the little girl on Willow's back broke into a tentative smile, her hand reaching to pat the mare's neck in newfound trust. She's good with them, Marcus observed. The children, almost like she understands what they need. Tommy smiled. She always understood what I needed, even when I didn't know myself. As the sun began its descent behind the hills, casting long shadows across the transformed estate, Tommy felt something settle within him, a certainty that had been forged in fear but tempered by courage. Willow Hill was no longer a place of desperate compromises and silent suffering. It had become a sanctuary, a place of healing, not just for him, but for others who needed to be seen and valued. Willow approached the fence, the little girl still, perched proudly on her back. The mare nudged Tommy's shoulder gently, as she had done countless times before, a gesture of affection that needed no words. Good girl, Tommy whispered, stroking her velvety nose. The best girl, and in the quiet understanding that passed between boy and horse, there was a promise kept, a trust honored, and a future unfolding that neither could have imagined in the dark days that now felt like a distant memory on Willow Hill. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional tales that remind us of the powerful bonds between children and animals. Leave a like if you were moved by Tommy and Willow's journey, and share in the comments which moment brought tears to your eyes. Remember, even in our darkest moments, courage, compassion, and the silent understanding of a loyal animal can light the way to a brighter tomorrow.